Chapter 1: The Song of the Dead Summer. The heat in Coldwater Falls didn't just sit on you, it tried to drown you. Patrick Vance sat on his porch, watching a cicada struggle against a spiderweb. He adjusted the lens on his old Nikon, trying to capture the exact moment the struggle ended. That's when he heard it. It wasn't the cheery, tinkling bell of the usual ice cream man. This was different. It was a mechanical wheeze, a melody played on an out-of-tune calliope. Pop goes the weasel. But the pop was a low, guttural thud that vibrated in Patrick's chest. Around the corner of Elm Street, the truck appeared. It was a jagged, boxy thing, painted a shade of purple that looked like a fresh bruise. The sides were plastered with fading stickers of treats that didn't exist. The brain freeze bar, the sour scream sandwich, the midnight cone. Wisps of unnatural, dry ice fog rolled off the roof, even though it was 98 degrees out. "Patrick, tell me you see that," Ashley said, skidding her bike onto his driveway. Her face was pale. "I see it," Patrick whispered, raising his camera. The truck slowed to a crawl. In the driver's window sat Barnaby. His face was a mask of white grease paint carved into a permanent, jagged grin. He didn't look at the road. He looked straight at the porch, straight at them. As he passed, he lifted a gloved hand, 4 fingers and a thumb, all strangely long, and waved. Slowly, methodically. "He looks like he's made of old nightmares and attic dust," Ashley whispered. The truck didn't stop for customers. It just kept rolling toward the edge of town, where the old limestone mines began. Chapter 2: The Empty Desk. The next morning, the heavy Missouri humidity was replaced by a cold, sharp dread that didn't belong in late August. Usually, the walk to Coldwater Middle School was filled with the sounds of skateboards clattering against pavement and kids complaining about the endless summer reading lists. But today, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. Even the cicadas were quiet, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Patrick and Ashley walked in silence. Patrick's binoculars bounced against his chest with every step. He kept adjusting the focus, aiming them at every dark alleyway and every thick patch of oak trees. He was looking for that bruised violet truck, but all he saw were long, stretching shadows. "You're gonna give yourself a headache," Ashley said, though her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. She was clutching her sketchbook tightly against her chest, her knuckles turning white. "I'm just being observant," Patrick defended. "Mom says I have an eye for detail, like how that clown yesterday didn't have any license plates on his truck. Did you notice that?" "I was too busy noticing the fact that his face looked like it was made out of wet drywall," Ashley countered. "Let's just get to school." Coldwater Middle School was a squat 3-story brick building that looked more like a factory than a place of learning. It had been built in the 1950s, and according to local legend, the basement was still connected to the old limestone quarry tunnels. Normally, the front lawn was a chaotic mess of flying backpacks and shouting kids. Today, it looked like a funeral. 2 police cruisers were parked crookedly on the grass by the front doors, their red and blue lights painting the red brick in rhythmic pulses. The tension inside was even worse. The hallways, usually buzzing with energy, were eerily quiet. Kids spoke in hushed whispers, huddled together by their lockers like penguins in a blizzard. When Patrick and Ashley walked into their homeroom, Mrs. Gable was sitting at her desk, staring blankly at an attendance sheet. She didn't even look up to tell Patrick to take off his baseball cap. Patrick slid into his seat and looked over at the desk next to his. It belonged to Joey Higgins. Joey was a loud, freckle-faced kid who couldn't sit still for more than 30 seconds. He was the kind of person who would eat a worm for $1 or try to do a wheelie on his bike while eating a slice of pizza. His desk was usually a disaster zone of crumpled papers, half-eaten candy bars, and plastic dinosaur toys. Today, the desk was perfectly clean, and completely empty. "Where's Joey?" Patrick whispered, leaning over to the girl in front of him, a girl named Mindy who knew everything about everyone. Mindy turned around, her eyes wide behind thick glasses. "You didn't hear? He never came home last night. My mom is on the town council. She said Joey's parents called the police at 10 p.m. because his dinner was cold and his bike was found in the ditch by Miller's Creek." Miller's Creek? Patrick's stomach did a slow, heavy flip. That's right by the entrance to the park, right where that weird truck drove past. "People are saying they heard music," Mindy whispered, leaning in so close Patrick could smell her grape bubblegum. "The police don't want to admit it, but everyone knows. It was the clown. My brother said he saw the clown handing out free samples of something called the Midnight Cone right before sunset." The school bell rang, but it didn't sound like the start of a normal day. It sounded like a warning. The day dragged on in a blur of nervous energy. Teachers gave up on trying to teach fractions or grammar and instead gave the students quiet study time, which really just meant an entire day of fueling the rumor mill. By the time the final bell rang at 3:15, the entire student body was in a state of near hysteria. "We have to go to the creek," Patrick said the second they stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the school. "Are you crazy?" Ashley stopped in her tracks, throwing her arms out. "The sheriff literally told everyone to stay away from the park and go straight home." "Exactly. The sheriff is looking for a giant purple truck. He's not looking for the small things. I have my binoculars, and you have your eye for weird stuff. We might see something they missed," Patrick pleaded, tapping his binoculars. "Fine," Ashley sighed, rolling her eyes toward the sky. But Patrick knew he'd won. She couldn't stand not knowing the truth any more than he could. "Deal. Deal." They took the long way around, avoiding the main roads where parents were already forming frantic carpools. They cut through the dense Missouri woods behind the ball fields, where the ground was spongy and smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. As they got closer to Miller's Creek, the air grew noticeably cooler. It wasn't the refreshing kind of cool. It felt like walking into a grocery store's walk-in freezer. They reached the edge of the park. Yellow police tape was stretched between two massive oak trees, cordoning off a gravel path that led deeper into the woods. A few yards away, a set of deep, jagged tire tracks cut through the mud, veering off the path straight toward the limestone bluffs. "Look at those tracks," Patrick whispered, adjusting the focus on his binoculars as they crouched behind a thicket of blackberry bushes. "They're not normal tires. They have these weird square teeth on them." "And look at the mud," Ashley added, pointing. "The mud is gray and wet everywhere else, but right inside those tire tracks, it looks frozen. There are actual ice crystals forming on the weeds." Patrick scanned the area beyond the yellow tape. No police officers were in sight. They had likely moved their search party deeper into the quarry caves. "Come on," Patrick hissed, grabbing Ashley's sleeve. They ducked low and scrambled under the police tape, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They moved toward the spot where Joey's bike had supposedly been found. The grass there was flattened as if a struggle had taken place. Patrick got down on his hands and knees, ignoring the mud soaking through his jeans. He combed through the tall weeds. "There's nothing here but dirt and... Wait." He stopped. Reaching down into a small, frozen puddle, his fingers brushed at something hard and wooden. He pulled it out. It was a popsicle stick, but it wasn't the normal flat, rounded kind you'd find at the bottom of a box of Rocket Pops. This one was nearly 8 inches long, slightly curved and thick. The wood was a strange, dark gray color, looking more like a piece of driftwood than birch. "What's that, Pat?" Ashley asked, kneeling beside him. "A popsicle stick. But look at it." Patrick turned it over in his hands. Etched on the surface were tiny, incredibly detailed symbols. They weren't burned in or drawn with ink. They looked like they were carved by frost. They were intricate, swirling patterns that looked like snowflakes under a microscope or ancient runes. "Is that writing?" Ashley asked, reaching out to touch it. The second her fingertips brushed the wood, she gasped and pulled her hand back. Ow! It's freezing. It's like touching dry ice. And look at the tip, Patrick pointed. The very end of the wooden stick was stained with a dark, sticky syrup. It wasn't the bright red of cherry or the deep blue of blue raspberry. It was a dark purple-black sludge that smelled overwhelmingly of peppermint and something metallic, like iron. That's not ice cream syrup, Pat, Ashley said, her voice shaking. That looks like blood. Suddenly, a heavy snapping sound echoed from the thicket of trees behind them. Both kids froze. Patrick slowly raised his binoculars, turning toward the sound. Through the magnified lenses, he saw a flash of bright neon green frizzy hair passing between two trunks. Then a chalk-white face turned toward them. It was Barnaby. He was... Chapter 3. The Lockdown Shadow. Monday morning at Coldwater Falls Middle School didn't feel like a school day. It felt like a funeral. Usually, the hallways were a chaotic mess of slamming lockers, shouted jokes, and the smell of overprocessed cafeteria pizza. But today, the air was thick with a heavy antiseptic silence. The school board had installed metal detectors over the weekend, a frantic knee-jerk reaction to the disappearances. Every student had to stand in a single-file line while a grim-faced security guard poked through their backpacks with a wooden ruler. They're looking for what? A giant silver ice cream scoop? Patrick whispered, adjusting the strap of his bag. He hadn't slept more than 4 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that flickering blue sign, 3 left. Ashley didn't answer. She was staring at a fresh missing persons poster taped to the trophy case. It was Joey Higgins. In the photo, he was grinning, holding a trophy from the Little League World Series. Someone had already drawn a crude, weeping clown face over his image in black permanent marker. People are losing their minds, Pat. Did you see the news this morning? The safety patrol has grown to 40 people. They're calling themselves the Coldwater Guardians. They're patrolling the streets in trucks, looking for anything violent. As they moved through the hallway, Patrick noticed something strange. The interior of the school felt wrong. Even though the Missouri sun was beating against the bricks outside, the hallway felt like a meat locker. A thin mist of condensation clung to the metal lockers, and the floor wax felt slippery, like it was turning to slush. "Do you feel that?" Patrick asked, shivering. "The AC must be on high," Ashley muttered, though she pulled her denim jacket tighter around her shoulders. The bell rang, a dull, clanging sound that seemed to vibrate in Patrick's teeth. He headed for his first period history class, but he couldn't focus on the Civil War. All he could think about was the song, the Iceman's Lament. He began to hum it under his breath, the slow, grinding melody looping in his brain. Clink, clank, low. Clink, clank, high. "Patrick Miller, is there something you'd like to share with the class?" Mr. Henderson, a man whose face looked like a crumpled paper bag, was looming over his desk. "No, sir," Patrick stammered. "Then stop that infernal humming. We are trying to discuss the Missouri Compromise, not whatever that dirge was." Patrick looked down at his notebook. He hadn't been taking notes. Instead, he had scrawled the words 3 left over and over again until the ink bled through the paper. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life with a burst of static that sounded like a scream. "Lockdown! This is not a drill. I repeat, this is a code blue lockdown. Teachers, secure your doors immediately." The voice of Principal Miller, no relation, was trembling. Patrick's heart lurched into his throat. A code blue meant an intruder on campus. The classroom erupted in a controlled panic. Mr. Henderson scrambled to the door, locking it and pulling the black shade over the small window. "Under the desks, now! Silence!" Patrick huddled under the laminate wood of his desk, his knees pressed against his chest. Beside him, a girl named Sarah was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. The room was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic thump-thump of Patrick's own heart. Then he heard it. From the hallway came a rhythmic, metallic sound. Squeak, clack, squeak, clack. It sounded like a heavy cart with a rusted wheel, but beneath the squeaking was a low, guttural hum. Someone was singing. It wasn't the Iceman's lament, but the voice was low and gravelly, sounding like stones grinding together in a blender. Squeak, clack, squeak, clack. The sound stopped right outside their door. The shadow of a pair of feet appeared in the sliver of light beneath the door. They were enormous, bulbous. The shadow of the person's head was strange, wild, frizzy hair that seemed to stand out in jagged spikes. Patrick gripped the leg of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. "It's him," he thought. He didn't wait for the sun to go down. He came for the three. A heavy hand rattled the doorknob. Clack, clack, clack. Then a slow, wet lick of a sound, like a tongue dragging across the wood. "Open up," the voice rasped. "I have a special today." Sarah let out a muffled sob. Mr. Henderson stood by the window, clutching a heavy stapler like it was a .45 caliber pistol. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a spray of liquid hitting the door. A bright blue puddle began to seep under the doorframe, the same neon slush they had seen at the park. "Get away from that door!" The sheriff's voice boomed from somewhere down the hall. There was a frantic scuffle, the sound of heavy boots, and a grunt of pain. "Secure him! Get him down!" Patrick scrambled out from under his desk as the all clear finally sounded 10 minutes later. The class hovered by the door as Mr. Henderson tentatively opened it. The hallway was a disaster zone. A large industrial-sized freezer cart lay on its side, leaking blue raspberry syrup all over the floor. Standing in the center of a circle of police officers was Mr. Gable, the school janitor. He wasn't a clown. He was wearing his usual gray coveralls, but he had a wild, unkempt white hair that looked like a wig in the shadows. He looked terrified, his hands zip-tied behind his back. I was just bringing the extra popsicles for the fundraiser," Mr. Gable cried, his voice cracking. "The freezer handle broke. I was trying to get someone to help me open the door." Sheriff Vance stood over him, his face a mask of exhaustion and embarrassment. He looked at the blue syrup on his boots and then at the trembling students in the doorway. "False alarm," the sheriff muttered, though he didn't sound relieved. He sounded disappointed. He wanted it to be over. He wanted a monster to catch, not a janitor with a broken cart. Patrick looked at the blue syrup. It looked exactly like the slush from the park, but as he leaned closer, he realized it was different. This syrup was warm. It was melting into the tile. The slush at the park had stayed frozen in 90-degree heat. He looked across the hall and saw Ashley standing in the doorway of her art room. She looked at the blue mess, then at Patrick. She shook her head slowly. "It wasn't him," she mouthed. As the school was dismissed early due to the incident, Patrick and Ashley walked towards the bike racks. The town's paranoia had reached a breaking point. If a janitor with a popsicle cart could trigger a tactical police response, Coldwater Falls was a powder keg waiting for a match. "Patrick?" Ashley said, stopping by her bike. She pointed towards the edge of the school's football field where the woods began. Standing just inside the shadow of the trees was the violet truck. It wasn't moving. No music was playing. Barnaby was sitting in the driver's seat, his white painted face leaning against the steering wheel. He looked tired. As Patrick watched, the clown lifted a small handheld radio, the kind that the safety patrol used, and listened to it. He shook his head, then put the truck in gear and slowly rolled deeper into the forest, vanishing before the police cruisers could even exit the parking lot. "He's listening to the police scanners," Patrick said, his voice a whisper. He knew about the lockdown. "He wasn't coming for us," Ashley said, her eyes narrowing as she watched the spot where the truck had been. "He was watching to see if the real thing showed up." "What real thing, Ash?" "The thing that makes the purple blood," Ashley replied, hopping on her bike. "Come on, we're going to the library. I want to know what happened in this town in 1926, and I want to know why that song sounds like a warning." Chapter 4: The Archives of the Blue Shiver. The Coldwater Falls Public Library didn't look like a place of learning. It looked like a mausoleum for books that died of old age. It sat on a hill overlooking the river, a squat gray stone building covered in ivy that looked like it was trying to strangle the structure. "I hate this place," Patrick whispered as they climbed the cracked marble steps. "It always smells like wet dogs and basement mold." "It's the only place in town with the microfiche records from before the '93 flood," Ashley said, her eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors. Inside, the air was still and remarkably cold, not the unnatural bone-chilling frost of the violet. Chapter 5: The Guardians of the Gate. The sirens of the Coldwater Guardians weren't like police sirens. They were the jagged, high-pitched wails of air horns and modified truck whistles, a sound designed to wake the dead and terrify the living. "Into the bushes, now!" Patrick hissed, grabbing Ashley's sleeve and pulling her behind a row of thick, overgrown hydrangeas near the library's side exit. A fleet of pickup trucks roared past, their high-beam headlights cutting through the Missouri fog like searchlights in a war zone. In the beds of the trucks stood men from the neighborhood. Patrick recognized Mr. Henderson from school and his own neighbor, Mr. Gable, who had apparently been released by the police and was now armed with a heavy-duty power washer. "They're heading for the park," Ashley whispered, her eyes wide as she watched the red taillights vanish into the mist. "They think he's gone back to the scene of the crime." "We have to show them this," Patrick said, holding up the popsicle stick Barnaby had thrown. The word "run" seemed to glow faintly in the dark, the jagged carvings pulsing with a dull blue light. "If those things, those shadow wraiths, are in the library, they're probably all over town. The clown isn't the one taking to kids, Ash. He's the one trying to stop the things that are." "Try telling that to a mob with pitchforks and flashlights," Ashley countered. She looked back at the library. The building was silent now, but the air around it felt thin and brittle, as if the very atoms were freezing solid. "Barnaby told us to run. We should listen." "Run where? Home? The slush was in our attic, remember? Nowhere is safe until we figure out how to stop the 3 left countdown." They began to jog toward the center of town, staying in the shadows of the massive oak trees that lined the sidewalks. Coldwater Falls felt different tonight. Usually, on a late August evening, you'd hear the rhythmic thum-thum of bass from passing cars or the distant sound of a baseball game on the radio. Tonight, the only sound was the wind whistling through the limestone cracks and the distant, rhythmic chanting of the Guardians over their CB radios. As they reached the town square, they saw the command center. The sheriff had set up a perimeter around the old gazebo. Tables were covered in maps of the limestone mines, and a large chalkboard showed the names of the missing children. Patrick's heart sank when he saw a new name being added to the bottom: Miss Hatcher. "He got the librarian," Patrick breathed. "The thing in the library, it didn't just eat the books." Suddenly, A hand clamped down on Patrick's shoulder. He let out a yelp, nearly dropping the popsicle stick. "What did I tell you to stay home?" It was their father. Mr. Miller looked exhausted. His face was streaked with soot, and he was holding a heavy iron tire iron. But it wasn't the exhaustion that scared Patrick. It was the look in his father's eyes. It was the look of someone who had stopped thinking and started only feeling. And what he was feeling was pure, unadulterated rage. "Dad, listen to us," Ashley cried. "We were at the library. We saw it. It wasn't the clown. It was this shadow thing. Barnaby saved us." Their father didn't even look at the popsicle stick Patrick was frantically waving. He grabbed both of them by the arms, his grip uncomfortably tight. "The clown has you brainwashed. He's using some kind of gas or magic. The sheriff found his menu in the park. It wasn't ice cream flavors, Patrick. It was a list of every kid in this town." "That's not true," Patrick yelled. "He's trying to warn us. Look at the stick. It says run." "I'm taking you home and I'm locking you in the storm cellar for your own good. The Guardians are going to the quarry tonight. We're going to burn that truck to the ground and find Joey and the others." "Dad, you can't. If you attack him, the wraiths will break free," Ashley pleaded. But Mr. Miller wasn't listening. He dragged them toward his SUV, which was parked haphazardly on the sidewalk. When he fumbled for his keys, a sudden sharp chill swept across the square. The streetlights flickered once, twice, and then shattered in a spray of glass. The chanting of the Guardians stopped. The radios went dead, replaced by a high-pitched, vibrating hum that made Patrick's ears bleed. From the storm drains in the center of the square, a thick blue mist began to pour out. It didn't rise into the air. It slithered across the pavement like a living thing, coating the tires of the trucks in a layer of instant frost. "What is that?" Mr. Miller gasped, dropping his tire iron. Out of the mist stepped the wraiths. They were dozens of them now, tall, spindly shapes made of gray rags and flickering shadows. They moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, their faces swirling like smoke in a gale. The Guardians let out a collective shout and began to charge, swinging their bats and spraying their power washers. But the water from the hoses froze mid-air, turning into jagged ice spears that shattered against the pavement. The baseball bats passed through the wraiths as if they were made nothing but air. "It's not working," someone screamed. "They're ghosts." "There aren't ghosts," Ashley shouted, though her voice was drowned out by the chaos. "They're hungry." Then the sound returned. Clink, clank, low. Clink, clank, high. The violet truck roared around the corner of Main Street, its tires screaming as it drifted into the square. The fiberglass cone on the roof was glowing with an intense, blinding white light. Barnaby was standing on the running board, one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding a massive, industrial-sized bag of rock salt. As the truck circled the square, he began to hurl handfuls of the salt at the wraiths. Wherever the salt touched the shadows, they let out a shriek like a tea kettle and dissolved into gray sparks. "Get him!" the sheriff yelled, pointing his pistol at the truck. "He's using the distraction to escape." Bang! The sheriff fired. The bullet punched a hole through the violet truck's windshield, missing Barnaby's head by inches. The clown didn't flinch. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked at Patrick and Ashley. He pointed his silver scoop toward the north, toward the old limestone processing plant, and then slammed the truck into gear. He's leading them away, Patrick realized, watching the truck speed out of the square with the mob of Guardians in hot pursuit. "But he's out of salt," Ashley pointing to the empty bag fluttering in the street. "And he's heading right into a trap." Mr. Miller stood frozen, looking at the spot where the wraiths had been. He looked at his shaking hands, then at his children. The rage in his eyes had been replaced by a dawning, horrific realization. "That thing, it wasn't a man," Mr. Miller whispered. "No, Dad," Patrick said, picking up his father's dropped tire iron. "The man is the one in the truck, and he's the only one who knows how to close the gate." Patrick looked at Ashley. They didn't need to speak. They knew what they had to do.
They weren't going to the storm cellar. They were going to the quarry, because the sign on the back of the violet truck as it disappeared into the fog had flickered one last time. 2 left. Chapter 6. The Great Cornfield Commotion. The town square was a nightmare of blue mist and screaming sirens, but as Patrick and Ashley sprinted down the alleyway behind the feed and seed, the sound began to muffle. The heavy, humid Missouri night swallowed the chaos, replacing it with the rhythmic chirping of crickets that didn't know the world was ending. "We can't walk to the quarry, Pat," Ashley panted, her sneakers slapping against the pavement. "It's 4 miles uphill through the back roads. The Guardians will be there in 10 minutes, and they'll have the place surrounded." "We need a car," Patrick said, looking desperately at the parked vehicles behind the hardware store. "No way," Ashley said, seeing the look in Patrick's eyes. "It's got a key in the ignition, Ash. Mr. Gable was so excited to join the mob he forgot to lock his garage." Patrick scrambled onto the high-backed yellow seat. "It's got a fast setting and a rabbit setting. I'm pretty sure the rabbit means it hauls." "It's a lawnmower," Ashley yelled. "We'll look like we're out for a very intense midnight landscaping session." "It's a 0 turn. We can cut through the Miller family cornfield. It's a straight shot to the limestone plant. No roads, no Guardians, no sheriff." Ashley looked toward the glowing red horizon where the town square was still humming with fear. She hopped onto the back of the mower, gripping the metal frame of the grass collection bag. "If we die, I'm telling Mom it was your idea." Patrick turned the key. The Grassmaster didn't just start, it roared. A plume of blue-tinted exhaust shot out of the chrome pipe. Patrick slammed the levers forward, and the mower lurched into the street with a violent jerk that nearly sent Ashley into a rose bush. "Watch the curb," Ashley shrieked. "I'm figuring it out," Patrick yelled, his hair whipped by the wind. They tore across the asphalt, the mower's blades whirring, though thankfully not engaged, creating a high-pitched mechanical drone. They reached the edge of the Miller cornfield, a wall of towering stalks that looked like a jagged green fortress in the moonlight. Patrick didn't slow down. He steered the Grassmaster straight into the rows. Thwack, 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 thwack. The cornstalks slapped against the front of the mower like 1,000 tiny hands. It was deafening. Inside the field, the world turned into a blur of yellow-green silk and brown dust. The mower's headlights cut 2 brilliant tunnels of light through the stalks, illuminating the occasional terrified field mouse or confused grasshopper. "This is actually kind of awesome."
Chapter 7. The Sugar-Coated Fortress. The limestone processing plant was a skeletal ruin of rusted corrugated metal and jagged conveyor belts that stretched into the side of the Missouri bluffs like the legs of a giant, dying insect. In the moonlight, the white dust that covered everything, the ground, the rusted machinery, the skeletal trees, made the entire valley look like it had been dusted with powdered sugar. "It's too quiet," Patrick whispered, abandoning the smoking remains of the Grassmaster 9000. He gripped the heavy tire iron his father had dropped, his knuckles white. "Quiet is better than the alternative," Ashley replied. She held her sketchbook like a shield, her eyes darting toward the violet truck. The truck was idling near the main conveyor intake. Its engine didn't sound like a normal motor. It sounded like a giant breathing in his sleep, a rhythmic, frosty wheeze. The dry ice fog rolling off the roof was so thick now, it had created a literal moat of white mist around the vehicle. "Barnaby," Patrick hissed, cupping his hands around his mouth. We know about the 1926 shiver." No answer, only the distant metallic clink, clink, clink of a cooling pipe. They stepped over a fallen no trespassing sign and entered the main processing floor. The interior of the plant was a cathedral of rust. Giant rock crushers sat silent, their jagged teeth covered in cobwebs. But as they moved deeper, toward the back where the mine shaft plummeted into the earth, the scenery changed. The rusted gray of the plant was being overtaken by something vibrant and impossible. "Look at the pipes," Ashley breathed, pointing upward. The old hydraulic lines had been wrapped in miles of neon-colored electrical tape. Hundreds of industrial-strength fans had been bolted to the catwalks, all of them pointed down toward the dark mouth of the mine. But it was the ice cream lab that stopped them cold. In the center of the floor, Barnaby had rigged a massive prehistoric rock grinder to a series of vats, but instead of gravel, the vats were filled with mountains of shimmering, iridescent salt and gallons of a thick, glowing blue liquid that smelled like 1,000 peppermint sticks being crushed at once. He's turned the whole plant into a giant refrigerator, Patrick realized, touching a nearby support beam. His hand stuck to the metal. It was coated in a layer of flash-frozen syrup. He's pumping the cold down into the caves, Ashley said, because that's where the 3 left are. She walked toward a row of high-tech monitors Barnaby had bolted to a wooden crate. The screens weren't showing computer code. They were showing thermal heat maps of the caves below. The maps were almost entirely deep blue, meaning frozen, except for one massive pulsing red shape at the very bottom of the shaft. The shape looked like a spider made of smoke. It was gargantuan, its legs stretching through the limestone veins of the entire county. "The Great Wraith," Patrick whispered. "The salt keeps it dormant. The ice keeps it locked in. Barnaby isn't a killer. He's a jailer." Suddenly, a heavy shadow loomed over them. They spun around, Patrick swinging the tire iron wildly. He stopped just inches from a polka-dot vest. Barnaby stood there, but he looked different. He'd removed his neon green wig, revealing a thin, snowy white hair that looked like real frost. His face was still painted, but the tears beneath his eyes were wet. Real tears had carved tracks through the grease paint. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an old man who had been fighting a war for 100 years and was finally out of ammunition. He looked at the kids, then at the tire iron. He slowly reached out and pushed the metal bar down with one long gloved finger. He didn't speak, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handheld chalkboard. With a piece of blue chalk, he scribbled 4 words: "Need more rock salt." "The Guardians," Ashley gasped. "They have the salt. The town uses it for the winter roads. They have tons of it at the depot." Barnaby shook his head sadly. He pointed toward the entrance of the plant. The roar of engines drowned out the peppermint-scented fans. Dozens of headlights flooded the processing floor, turning the ice cream lab into a blinding, jagged stage. The Coldwater Guardians had arrived. Sheriff Vance stepped out of the lead truck with his shotgun leveled at Barnaby. Behind him, Mr. Miller and 30 other men spilled out, their faces twisted in a mixture of terror and triumph. "Step away from the children, you freak," the sheriff bellowed. "No, Sheriff, wait," Patrick yelled, sprinting into the light, his arms spread wide. "He's not the one. The thing is under the floor. He's keeping it down there." "Patrick, get out of the way," his father shouted, his voice cracking. "Look at what he's done to this place. He's got vats of chemicals. He's been experimenting on the kids." One of the men, a local contractor named Miller, no relation, swung a heavy sledgehammer against one of the neon-taped pipes. "Let's see how he likes it when we break his toys." Crack! The pipe burst. Instead of water, a spray of pressurized blue slush erupted, hitting the contractor and instantly pinning his arm to the wall in a block of solid ice. "He's attacking!" someone screamed. "No! You're breaking the seal!" Ashley shrieked. The ground beneath them groaned, a deep tectonic sound that felt like the earth was clearing its throat. The thermal monitors on the crate began to flash a violent, angry purple. The red shape at the bottom of the map began to move, fast. The Great Wraith was waking up, and it was very, very hungry. Chapter 8: The Breach of the Blue Shiver. The sound wasn't a scream. It was a low-frequency hum that vibrated the very marrow in Patrick's bones, making his teeth ache and his vision blur. It was the sound of 1,000 years of silence being broken at all once. "Get back! Everybody, get back!" Sheriff Vance yelled, his bravado fannily cracking like a dry stick. He tried to scramble away from the center of the floor, but the blue slush from the broken pipe had turned the concrete into an ice rink. He went down hard, his shotgun skidding across the floor toward the gaping mouth of the mine shaft. The black, oily mist didn't just rise, it coiled. It had a physical weight, smelling like stagnant river water and the metallic tang of an old penny. From the depths of the shaft, two glowing violet eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, flickered into existence. The great wraith was rising. It didn't have a solid body. It was a shifting, translucent mass of jagged shadows and frozen vapor. As its head cleared the edge of the shaft, the temperature in the processing plant plummeted. The air didn't just get cold, it turned brittle. A drop of moisture on Patrick's sleeve turned into a crystal of ice in less than a second. "It's beautiful," someone whispered. Patrick turned to see one of the guardians walking toward the creature, his eyes glazed and vacant. "Mr. Henderson, stop!" Ashley screamed, but the man didn't hear him. The wraith was emitting a soft, melodic trill, a distorted, haunting version of the Iceman's lament. It was the whisper that lured the children, a Piscean siren song that promised a sleep that never ends. Barnaby moved faster than any man his age should have. He lunged forward, grabbing Mr. Henderson by the back of his tactical vest and throwing him toward the safety of the violet truck. The clown then turned toward the great wraith, holding his silver scoop like a knight's sword. "He's protecting us," Patrick shouted, as his voice was barely audible over the howling wind that was now whipping through the plant. "Dad, look at him!" Mr. Miller was huddled behind a rusted rock crusher, his face pale. He watched as Barnaby stood his ground against the towering shadow. The great wraith lashed out with a limb made of swirling mist, striking Barnaby across the chest. The clown's white grease paint smeared against the cold metal of a vat. The wraith turned its attention to the crowd of men. It opened its mouth, a jagged tear in the mist, and let out a blast of pure, absolute zero air. "The truck," Ashley realized, grabbing Patrick's arm. "The only thing that's still warm is the truck." She was right. The violet truck's engine was still humming, its special menu sign glowing with a fierce, protective orange light. The dry ice fog rolling off the roof was meeting the wraith's black mist and creating a buffer zone of freezing gray sparks. "Patrick, Ashley, get in the truck," their father yelled, crawling toward them. "But we can't just leave him," Patrick pointed to Barnaby, who was struggling to get back to his feet. The clown's polka dot suit was shredded, revealing skin that looked like it was made of blue porcelain. He wasn't bleeding red. He was leaking a glowing neon blue fluid. The great wraith lunged again, its shadowy fingers wrapping around the main support beam of the plant. The metal groaned and snapped like a toothpick. The entire roof began to sag, sending a shower of rusted bolts and limestone dust on the guardians. "The salt!" Patrick screamed, spotting a forgotten bag near the ice cream lab equipment. "Barnaby needs the salt to bind it." Patrick didn't think. He bolted from the safety of the rock crusher, sliding across the ice toward the bag. The great wraith's head snapped toward him, its violet eyes narrowing. It let out a screech that shattered every remaining window in the plant. "Patrick, no!" Ashley cried. The great wraith swung a massive, shadowy arm toward the boy, but before it could strike, a blast of sound erupted from the violet truck. It wasn't music. It was a high-frequency mechanical roar, the sound of 1,000 industrial freezers being turned on at all once. Barnaby had crawled to the truck and slammed a hidden button on the dashboard labeled the Blizzard option. The fiberglass cone on the roof began to spin, emitting a blinding strobe light that froze the wraith in its tracks. The shadow monster recoiled, its form flickering and becoming less solid. "Now, Pat, throw it," Ashley yelled. Patrick grabs the heavy bag of rock salt, but it was too heavy. A note from the author. If you're reading this, it means you've successfully survived a trip to Coldwater Falls without being turned into a human popsicle or a snack for a subterranean shadow wraith. Congratulations! Most people aren't that lucky, or that fast on a riding lawnmower. Writing The Last Scoop made me think a lot about the things that scare us. Usually, we're afraid of the loud noises, the sharp teeth, and the guys in neon polka dot suits who look like they haven't slept since the Hoover administration. We spend so much time looking at the creepy clown that we completely miss the fact that the real monsters are often the ones we can't see, the ones hiding in the dark corners of our own towns, or worse, in our own snap judgments. Barnaby wasn't exactly a ray of sunshine, was he? He was cold, he was silent, and he definitely needed a better makeup artist. But while the good folks of the town were busy sharpening their pitchforks, he was the only one standing between them and a literal abyss. It turns out that being a hero doesn't always come with a cape and a bright smile. Sometimes it comes with a silver scoop and a very misunderstood sense of fashion. So, the next time you see something that makes your skin crawl, take a second look. The scariest face in the room might just be the one saving your life. And if you hear a faint, out-of-tune organ melody drifting through your neighborhood on a hot August night, well, maybe just leave a little extra rock salt on your porch, for traction. If you enjoyed your stay in the chilling Missouri fog, there are plenty of other shadows waiting for you. Dive deeper into the darkness with the rest of the Blackwell Chronicles by Burton Blackwell. From haunted relics to things that go bump in the Ozarks, the nightmares are only just beginning. Find the entire collection of the Blackwell Chronicles exclusively at Amazon.com. Stay spooky and stay cool. Burton Blackwell.